So welcome. I suspect several of you are familiar with Ryan, but Ryan Jacobson is here for an author talk with us today. It's sort of an interactive discussion. He is the author of over 50 titles. He is also a publisher. So if you have publishing related questions, feel free to ask him those as well. And I will let you take it over.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, as she said, my name is Ryan Jacobson. I live up in Mora, Minnesota, it's on Highway 23 about 4.5 hours from here. So I get back to town often. My grandma, of course, lives right here in town, and my parents live a little bit further down on 23 in Pipestone. I've been an author for about 15 years, and altogether in that time I've written right around 50 different books. I do picture books, chapter books, comic books, ghost stories, humor books, fiction, nonfiction. I've done it all. It's hard to know what to talk about when I do libraries because you never know who the audience is going to be. So mainly what I'm planning on doing is just fielding questions. And if you guys have questions about writing books or publishing or being an author or how did I get to look so good, anything you want to know, you feel free to ask. And then a little bit later on, I'll do a reading from one of my books. And then maybe if we can get the kids up here, we'll put together a brand new made-up story.
That's what I was going to ask you to
do. That you guys will make up. But before we do that, I want to find out what you guys want to talk about. So just really informally, if you have any questions about being an author or writing books or how to get your book published or anything you want to know, we'll start there. Make sure we talk about what you guys want to talk about.
Well, I think it'd be interesting for the girls to, how do you start writing?
How do you start writing? Any of you aspiring writers? Sort of? Yes, no, maybe?
I'd say this one.
This one? Aspiring writer?
Because we just like the drama.
We just want to hear what you're going to tell us.
All right. Well, I could tell you, I could stand here all day and talk.
Yeah.
I love hearing myself talk. How to get started writing. The thing that I tell people from a very young age, the most important thing to do if you want to be an author, and it's pretty obvious, the two things you need to do are read lots of books and practice writing every single day. That's really where it starts. I tell people that reading books is sort of like exercise for your imagination. When we read books, our imaginations go wild. I mean, if any of you ever read a book before and you sort of figured out how it was going to end before you got to the end of the book? Has that ever happened to you guys? Like, I know how this is going to end. Yeah, sometimes. And if any of you ever done that and the ending that you thought was going to happen was actually better than the actual ending of the book you read? That happens sometimes. It's like, oh, they should have ended it my way. That would have been way better. That's just one example of how when we read books, our imaginations go into overload, and the more we read, the better our imagination gets, which is really key when it comes to creating your own stories and writing your own books. And then, of course, practicing writing every day, whether it's writing in a journal, writing a letter to a friend or a relative, or even writing your own stories. The more you do that, obviously it's practice, the better you get. It's just like a sport. The more you practice basketball, the better you are at basketball. The more you practice writing, the better you'll become at writing and at storytelling. So that is definitely the place to start when it comes to writing and becoming a good writer and a good storyteller. Any other questions? Anything I can tell you?
Is there a different genre that's easier to write, or is that per person and what they enjoy as an author?
Sure. Is there a different genre? Yeah, that's easier. It depends. It depends on the writer more than anything else. The cliche is, write what you know and write what you love, and that's absolutely true. You want to write what you know and what you love because it's going to be more fun that way. If you love reading picture books and if you think the artwork is beautiful and captivating and you love the short stories and how every word is really, really important to choose when you're writing a really short picture book, if you enjoy that, then that might be the kind of project for you. Whereas if you want to flesh out your story more, expand, add more characters, add more detail, maybe you want to try a chapter book or even a novel. And then if you're into say you guys play Fortnite, this video game? You guys play that? No?
No,
You do? Yeah, my sons are really into Fortnite. If you're into this video game, maybe you want to write a how-to book or secret tips on how to be better at Fortnite. So you want to take something that's of interest to you and share your expertise and share your knowledge with other people. And that's something, if you want to write nonfiction, that's also an option that a lot of writers choose to do. You guys are
I wonder if the
quiet.
girls know what nonfiction is.
Fiction is a made-up story, whereas nonfiction is true, real life. Like a biography would be fiction, or a how-to book would also be an example of fiction, or of nonfiction, excuse me.
You had mentioned in the middle school presentation, what was the breakdown in sales about between fiction and nonfiction? What did people buy?
Yes. What do you guys think sells better, fiction or nonfiction? Anybody have a guess?
Fiction.
Who thinks fiction sells better? Who thinks nonfiction sells better? You're the winner. Nonfiction does sell better. The gap isn't as wide as it used to be, but nonfiction probably makes up, when all is said and done, 55 to 60% of all book sales. And now that includes religion, it includes biographies and autobiographies, and the big one, of course, is the self-help and the dieting and health. Cookbooks and things like that are also considered nonfiction. But health is, actually religion is higher than health, but health is second highest in the nonfiction category. We all love our diet books, right?
You read them and it doesn't happen though.
I know. I saw a post on Facebook that said something like, I want to diet, but I don't want to fall for the scam of exercising and eating better. Something to that effect. Yeah, that's about right. Anything else you guys are wondering about?
I honestly don't know the answer to this. Do you have to do a lot of research for the books you write, or not? I mean,
Do
you
I have
said
to
to
do a lot
go
of
with what you
research?
know.
It depends on the book. Obviously, if I'm writing a nonfiction book, and like I've done a few biographies over the years, my Adam Thielen football biography, this required a great deal of research. I mean, everything that's written in here had to be researched. Same with my very first book ever. The first book I ever got published is the biography, a children's biography of Eleanor Roosevelt. Very research intensive. I didn't know a lot about Eleanor Roosevelt before I wrote this, but the internet and the library found all sorts of great sources. And so when you're writing nonfiction, a lot of research is involved. When you're writing fiction, less so, but there again, it depends. I wrote a Storm at the Summit of Mount Everest is a fiction title, but you want it to be realistic sounding. And so I did a lot of research on Mount Everest and on mountain climbing in general. So it really depends. Whereas a book like, a book about Dracula, not much research at all was required. I just wrote the story.
What is your favorite kind of story?
My favorite kind of story tends to be I love, the age I love writing for the most is 4th and 5th grade. That's just about, for me, the right amount of detail and story development that I like on the 4th and 5th grade writing level. My favorite kind of books for that age, right, isn't exactly a genre, but I love writing the choose your path or choose your own adventure kind of books, the interactive fiction, where the reader gets to make choices every few pages in the story, and the story changes depending upon what the reader chooses. If I had to choose from there, I'd probably say I've always liked writing about monsters and scary things, but it's more the age group than the subject matter that I prefer.
Can you tell us more about writing choose your own adventure type books? Because those just sound like so much fun.
Sure, yeah, I was actually, we were just talking about that earlier. The way I write it, there are two different kinds of choose your own adventure or interactive types of fiction. There are two different styles. The choose your own adventure, the classic choose your own adventure style, is actually a bunch of different short stories chopped up and mixed together. I don't know a lot about that particular model because that's not what I write, But when you read a Choose Your Own Adventure, you're reading, the book is 150 pages, but as you're reading it, you're only reading stories that are about 14 or 15 pages long in total. And, the story changes based on the decisions you make, but if you go back and make different decisions, you get an entirely different story. So the intent of a Choose Your Own Adventure book is to read it multiple times. Whereas mine is more of, we call it Choose Your Path. It's slightly different than that. It's actually one story. And the way I describe it, I actually just drew it a little bit earlier. You have the beginning of the story, and you have the end of the story. And the story follows a straight line. And in my books, your goal when you're reading a Choose Your Path book is just like in a regular book. You're reading it from beginning to end. And your goal in my Choose Your Path books is to get to the end. The difference is, every chapter or so, you'll be reading and you'll get to a point where you, as the main character in the story, need to make a choice. And what you want to do in my books is make the choice that keeps you on the path. But there's also a choice that takes you off the story path. And usually if you make this choice, something bad happens. You die, or you break your leg, or something, and the story ends. So then you have to go back and try again. Other times, you might get to a choice, and where if you make one choice, you stay on the main path. If you make another choice, it takes you to a different choice over here. And if you make the right choice here, you get back to the main path, and if you make the wrong choice here, you die. So what I do when I'm writing a Choose Your Path or a Choose Your Own Adventure story, I write the main story first. I write this whole thing from beginning to end. And then I'll go back and identify all the choices, and then I'll write, this is actually the hard part for me. You got to write a whole bunch of different death scenes and terrible things happening. And so then after I do that, I put it all together. And how many of you ever read a Choose Your Path or Choose Your Own Adventure type of book before? It's like about half. The question that I get from people who aren't familiar with it at all is, how do you know, how does this work when you get to a choice? And you jump around in the book. Like here's an example right here. We're on page 25, and you get to the end of the section, and you have two choices right here. If you choose to climb, turn to page 56. If you choose to wait, turn to page 41. So then you're jumping. You say, I'm going to wait. So then you jump over to page 41. And then it gives you more instructions. And so that's how it works. If you're jumping around a lot in the book, you don't read it from page 1 to page 160. You're jumping all over the place. So that's how those work. I love writing those. It's a challenge, but it's an interesting challenge.
How long does it take you to write one like that?
How long does it take to write one? Usually, it depends on the subject matter, but I'd say 6 months is probably pretty normal for putting one of those together.
Are you writing every day the same? Or when you're writing, do you go this book until it's done, or do you go do a little bit of this book, a little bit of this book?
I used to, back when I had more energy and more willpower and more drive, I used to work on 3 or 4 different books at a time. I get bored pretty easily, so I would write one book for a little while, then I would jump to another book, and then I'd jump to another, then I'd jump back to the first and just chip away, write for an hour or 2 every day. Now I'm more one book at a time. Right now I'm working on a new football biography, and I'm not going to start anything else until I finish that one. And it's on to the next one. I'm almost done though. This weekend I think I'll finish, and then I can start my next project.
So when?
Oh,
Okay,
sorry.
go. I was just gonna say, when's it gonna come out then?
These are football biographies, so we're doing a batch of 3 new football biographies to go with the Adam Thielen book we're doing, because this book sold really, really well in the fall. So we're going to do 3 more football biographies. So these are going to come out right around football season, September.
So obviously from your laptop, it goes to publisher then, right?
Yeah, these, I'm actually the publisher. I own the publishing company with a couple of other people, and so we are the publisher of these. So it'll go from me to editing and proofreading, and then it'll go into design. And from there it goes to the printer, and from there it goes to the warehouse, and from there it goes to the bookstores.
How about people that draw for you?
What about, like...
Because you don't draw everything.
No, I
pictures,
don't.
right?
I am not an illustrator.
That's the
you
word.
good artists? You like to draw? You do too? What are you? Are you an artist? You like to art? You like to draw, paint, illustrate? A little bit? Yeah, that's not a talent that I have, and I'm jealous of anybody who can because I'm just not very good at it. So what we do is when we have a book that requires illustrations, we will search online or go to comic book conventions or where else? We've also put ads in like college publications in the past too to find artists, and we'll have artists send us samples, and then we'll choose an illustrator based on how good of a fit it is for the particular project. You know, if we're doing a cartoony project, like Wrestling with a Werewolf is a book I did about 10 years ago, and it's a funny, silly, kind of weird story. So we wanted it to feel like a cartoon that you would watch on TV. So we found an illustrator named Diana Knock, and she does very cartoony types of illustrations. Let's see if I can find one on the inside too. You know, really silly stuff. And so she was a perfect fit for this kind of story because we wanted it to feel whimsical. And even though it's about a werewolf, we didn't want it to feel scary at all. We wanted it to be more silly. Whereas, you know, this one, Storm at the Summit of Mount Everest, it's a fictional story, but it's based in reality. So we wanted an illustrator who painted really realistic-like, almost photographic-like illustrations. And so, you know, he has a much more realistic style than Diana did. And so he was a good fit for this particular book. He also did this one. These illustrations.
I love that book.
These illustrations blow me away. See if I can find a really good one here. I mean, they're all really good, but yeah.
So if you find a good one, do you keep a bond with, like, keep them in the back of your mind and try to use them again?
Yeah, once you find a good one, at least for me anyways, once I find a good one, anytime I have his name is David Hemenway, and once I find, or once I do a realistic project, he's always the first person I ask. Although he realized how good he was, and now he tripled his rates. So he's a little more expensive. Oh, yeah, here's another one. Like comic books, you know, I would never ask David, this guy, to do a superhero comic book because, you know, the style just wouldn't be a good fit. So you want someone who does really, you know, cartoony type of work. Yeah, I wish I could draw like that. Yeah, I love working with illustrators. Every time you get an illustration sent to you, you know, someone else is taking what's in your imagination and creating it into, you know, a physical representation. And so I love that. Every time an illustrator sends me an illustration for one of my stories, it's like a Christmas present. I just can't wait to look at it and see how my vision turned into someone else's artwork. And that's one of my favorite things about being an author, for sure.
As an author, do you require them to read your text before they illustrate it?
Not necessarily. It's definitely preferred, but really my main job when I work with an illustrator is to make sure the illustrator knows what I want. And so rather than having them read it, I think more important than that is I will describe, you know, I'll write paragraphs in great detail. This is what I want. And so if the illustrator ever draws something totally off base, it's usually my fault for not explaining it well enough. So, and that's actually the hardest part about writing a comic book, and why comic books are my favorite kind of books to read, but my least favorite kind of books to write. Because a comic book is usually 22 pages of story, and there's an average of 4 to 5 panels per page. So as the author, I have to describe more than 100 different illustrations, take what's in my brain and explain that 100 times over to the artist so the artist knows what to draw. And that it's very, very time consuming. It takes a lot more time than writing a book does. I mean, to try to tell someone from a blank piece of paper, this is exactly what I want you to draw in every corner of this picture. It's very hard. It's very hard to do that.
Would it be hard for you, I'm curious about this, would it be hard for you to give an example, like find a picture in a book and tell us what you would have told the illustrator you wanted, or is that too hard for you?
Sure, I can try. Eagle in the Sky is probably the easiest one to do that for. And this one this one wasn't quite as hard. Like the first illustration in the book, I told David, I said, my vision for this is that we are inside the egg. We're in the baby eagle's perspective, the eagle's perspective. We are inside the egg. We have just broken that egg open with our beak, and we are seeing the real world outside for the very first time. And so then I would tell him, we're in a nest made from sticks, and then I would reference an eagle's nest for him so he knows what it looks like. And we were looking out into the sky, and typically the mom and dad aren't in the nest at that time, but they're pretty close by. And so he drew the mom and the dad flying in the sky near the nest. And then you get the nest right here, and then otherwise he made the little forested area there. So that's sort of the thing. Then the next page is these aren't as hard because since it's nonfiction, or fiction heavily based on nonfiction, I can send him reference photos and say, all right, now we need to see the baby eagle, and we need to see it in size and in scale to what the full-grown adult eagle looks like, so draw them in the nest together. So.
How many chances does he have to get the perfect picture? You know what I'm, like how many sketches or whatever did he send you? Does it go through the process or you get the final picture?
Yeah, the question is more how many chances do I get to correct him? Because most illustrators, time is money, and most illustrators expect you to explain it to them well enough that when they sketch it for the first time, they're going to be pretty close to 100%. And so if they sketch what you told them to sketch, and you see it and you don't like it and it's your fault, then they will usually make you charge you for changes. But it's fully expected that you're in the ballpark. The illustrator illustrated what you drew. They send it to you, and it's 80% spot on. But maybe I'll catch things like this character's arm is too big for his body, so make the arm smaller, and things like that, where you're fine tuning. And that we can go back like that probably 3 or 4 times where it's fine-tuning stuff. It's pretty rare that I would send back an illustration and say, this isn't what I wanted at all, try again. Probably maybe 2 or 3 times ever I've done that. But yeah, usually 3 or 4 times, and this is just pencil sketches where, the first time, I wish I had an example of this here, but the first time it's more, all right, we have a character standing here, and he's running, and this guy standing over here. It's like this amount of detail, with the sword. And so it's just the composition, like, okay, that's roughly what I want. And then they'll fine tune it a little bit more. Yep, the facial expression is right, make this other guy look meaner, little changes like that, and then they'll fine tune it again. And then once it's improved in pencil form, then they will either paint it or ink it with a black marker. And then at that point, you don't want to change anything because that makes them cranky. I love working with illustrators.
Tell them the story that the co-author had on feeling.
Adam Thielen book? Yeah, I was actually going to read a little bit from that, and I will certainly do that in a minute if we have time. This book, I'm so excited about it. I'm so happy that I got to write it. I actually started Adam Thielen. I started this book, what year was it, 2010? It was Adam's first year, and I can't remember off the top of my head now, but it was his first year on the team. And his story is so interesting. And if you're not familiar with him, he is a Minnesota boy. He grew up in Detroit Lakes, up in northwestern Minnesota, and was a Vikings fan his whole life. Nobody wanted him for college football. He ended up going to play for college in Mankato. He almost played basketball at Concordia in Moorhead because no football teams wanted him. And eventually, Mankato, I believe one of their wide receivers got injured before the season, so they offered Adam a $500 scholarship just because they needed someone to play there. And so he played there, and he had a great career there, one of their best receivers ever, but Mankato is a very small school. He wasn't on the NFL's radar at all. So he paid his own way to get his, to go to these combines where his speed and his quickness and his hands and his jumping ability, where they measured all of that. And he was just good enough at those combines to get invited to try out for the Minnesota Vikings. And they didn't really expect him to make the team. He was mostly there just to be a tackling dummy for the good players. But he did such a good job that they decided to keep him. And he worked his way onto the team over time. And I heard that story, and I thought, this would make a great book. If only he'd do something cool, like if he could score a touchdown or something, that could be like the end of the book, and I could write a story around that. It'd be a really inspirational story. And so his rookie year, he did. In November, he blocked a punt and scooped it up and returned it for a touchdown. And I thought, there it is, we have the ending of our book. And so I started writing his biography, 5 years ago now, or whatever it was. And never got around to finishing it. I just kind of sat there. In the meantime, he went on to become one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. He was in the Pro Bowl, did all these amazing things, setting records in the NFL. Just became this great player. And I had this biography that I had started and never got around to finishing. But then a couple of years, it would be 2 years ago now. Yeah, 2 years ago now. A new teacher moved to Moore, where I live, and was teaching at my wife's school. And my wife came home one day and said, hey, I met this new teacher. She said she's cousins with one of the Minnesota Vikings players. I said, Adam Thielen? And she's like, oh, I don't know who any of those guys are. I said, well, ask her if it's Adam Thielen. If it is, have her email me, because I want to tell her about this book I'm working on. So Laura got in touch. Her name was Lindsay Von Ruden. And Laura got in touch with her. Lindsay sent me an email and said, yeah, your wife said I should email you about this book you're writing about my cousin. And so we got to talking. I told her about the project. I invited her to work on it with me. And she talked to her family, and her family thought it was a great idea, so they agreed. And so over the course of the following year, she and I worked together and were able to write Adam's biography. So where did I put it? Oh, here it is. So over the course of a year, Adam wasn't directly involved himself, but we communicated with his wife and with his parents, and of course, Lindsay talked to her mom and dad, Adam's aunt and uncle, and we got a whole bunch of, like we got Adam's senior picture from high school. We got some football, like here's his middle school basketball picture. All these great fun shots that we, high school graduation, that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to get, and some inside stories from the family. And I'm so proud of how this book turned out, and it's done really, really well since it was released in October. And I think I'll take this opportunity to read you a really quick bit of writing from the story. This is about that first touchdown he scored. This is chapter 18 of the book. It's his first season with the team and his very first NFL touchdown. And really the thing that inspired me to write this book in the first place. Adam's hard work throughout the 2013 season had opened a lot of eyes. He had proven that he could perform at a high enough level to compete in the league. Here.
Is there a book that you wrote at the beginning that now the more practice, so to say, that you're like, oh, I wish I would have done this with it, or I wish, could you redo it for like a different ending or a different?
Yeah, I feel that way about every book, actually.
Sure.
Probably the most glaring example are the Santa Claus Super Spy books. You know, I generally don't let myself go around and fiddle with the text because nothing's ever done. As far as I'm concerned, when I'm writing something, it's never done. I could go back and I could be revising these things for 20 more years. But eventually you have to just say, all right, this has to be good enough. I have to be done.
Do you want to
And,
go back and tell them why you started writing, or not want to get into?
Well, I can, but I'll finish my thought first.
Okay.
The thing that I've been doing with these, though, as I reprinted them, like this one, I changed the illustrations. That was one of the bigger mistakes I made when I first started. I really had no idea how to find an illustrator. So I had a friend who had a cousin or friend or something in college who was an art major. And she was brand new, she didn't know what she was doing, and I didn't know what I was doing. And her name was Erica, and so she was my illustrator for the first 3 of the Santa Claus Super Spy books. And going back now, I would, her style is pretty, see if I can find it better on here. It's pretty primitive, I guess, for lack of a better word, compared to some of the other illustrators I've worked with since. I mean, it's good enough, but I would go back and, if I were to do these again, I would go back and have a more professional, and she could probably do it now and do a much better job, but have a more professional illustrator working on the books. That would be probably my biggest example, but yeah, as far as the text goes, once they're published, I just have to say, I can't go back to this. I can't revisit this. Because I'd do that forever. Yeah, as for the story grandmas, the reason I started self-publishing in the first place, my wife and I decided to adopt in, what year was it? 2004. We decided to adopt, and it cost $16,000 at that time, and we just, we couldn't afford that. So I had these Santa Claus Super Spy manuscripts that I had written, and we thought, let's take a chance, let's gamble here, let's take our savings, and it was like $4,000 or $5,000. Let's take our $4,000 or $5,000. I'm going to publish these books, and let's see if we can sell enough books that we can raise enough money to adopt a baby. And it worked. The first book sold so well. We did it with the first book. It did so well that we did a second book, and over the course of a year or two, I was doing book sales at craft fairs and school visits, and a few stores were carrying them for us too. And we were eventually able to raise enough money that we were able to adopt our first boy in 2006. So that is the story that she was referring to. Any other questions? You guys want to know the secret to storytelling? You guys going to come up here and help me?
It's fun.
What do you think?
They're going to.
All right, good.
It's fun.
All right, I'm going to tell you guys this. Where did I put buckets? These are different color. The secret. The story. Who wants to be the star of the story? All right, come on. Your hand was up first. All right.
I'm always a star.
Think of a name for your character. What's your character's name going to be?
Lila.
Lila. All right. The first thing every story needs is a character. We'll do this really quick. Character. Now, when we have a character in a story, we need to give that character something to do, because otherwise it's not really a story. The character has to do something, right? And there's a really simple trick that we can use as authors or as storytellers to give our character something to do, to create action. And it's so easy, it's almost embarrassing. But all we need to do is give our character a goal. What does that mean? What's a goal? I'm not talking about hockey or soccer or anything like that. What's a goal? Who can tell me? What does that mean? You know what that means? What's a goal?
That means having this thing done.
Yes, perfect. Having something to get done or having something to do. Perfect. So Lila will have a goal in our story. Lila, let's say in our story, you are really, really thirsty, okay? Show everybody what that looks like to be really thirsty. Perfect. So Lila, your goal in our story is going to be to get a drink of water, all right? I'm going to put this over here. We won't walk all the way to the table, we'll just put it there. So a character with a goal, that creates action. Now our character has something to do. She has to go over and get a drink of water. But that's pretty boring. All she wants is a drink of water. She can get it pretty easily. A story doesn't become a story until we add the third, and probably the most important thing. A story doesn't work until we add a problem. So who wants to be our problem? All right, come on. Let's make you some scary, terrible, horrible thing. You're going to be guarding the water. What horrible thing do you want?
I want to be a temple with booby traps in it.
A temple with booby traps in it. All right. A dangerous temple. All right. Now, the key to making this work, though, is it's really in the goal. If she just wants a drink of water, she doesn't have to go through a temple with booby traps to get a drink of water. She could just grab this bottle of water over here instead. It doesn't work. So we need to make her goal more important. The story only works if the goal is important. So why does she need this bottle of water? What's so special about that bottle of water that she needs it and no other water will do? Anybody have any ideas? What?
It's sugar.
It's sugar.
How about it gives her special powers?
Oh, I like it. Special powers. So it's magical water and will give her special powers. Anything else?
It contains an antidote
It's an
to a
antidote.
poison that she has received.
It's an antidote. If she does not drink that water, she will die. All right, so once you have this, once you have a character with a really important goal and a problem, you have a story. All right? So the only way to make the story even better is to add more problems. Who else wants to be a problem in our story? Yeah, come on. What scary thing do you want to be?
Lion.
A lion, perfect. All right. Come over here, you be a lion. All right. Let's give this a try. I'm going to stand over here so I don't get hurt. Once upon a time, there was an adventurer named Lila. Lila was having a very, very bad day. You see, Lila was dying. And there was only one thing in all the world that could save her. The magical bottle of water hidden in the temple. Lila had to get it. She knew if she did, she would be saved. And she would also get magical superpowers. So Lila began her dangerous journey to get the water. But then she stopped, for she was attacked by a lion! The lion roared! Lila was in huge trouble. Luckily, the lion stopped. Luckily, Lila was a trained lion ninja. Lila karate chopped the lion and kicked the lion. And then she did a cartwheel and a backflip. Oh, okay, all right. The lion was defeated. Lila continued on her dangerous journey. She ventured into the tunnel and was encountered by booby traps and scary things. Luckily, Lila used her ninja skills to dodge them all. She grabbed the water, she drank it, and she was saved. The end. Very good. Good job. Good job. It's just that easy. We just made up a story. What did that take us? 2 minutes?
I think that's a new topic at your Christmas party.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's fun.
This is what stories are. It's just that easy. Stories are characters with goals dealing with problems. You know, your character could be a teenage girl. Her goal could be survive, but the problem is she's forced to play in the Hunger Games. It's characters with goals dealing with problems. Or your character could be a pink pony who wants to be best friends with the blue pony. But the problem is the blue pony is already best friends with the purple pony. They're characters with goals dealing with problems. This is what most stories are. And I spent an hour a day talking to 5th and 6th graders about this, but it really is that easy. You can make up stories with just those 3 things. And what I told them today and what I tell anybody who wants to write stories, if you're ever interested in writing and you don't know what to write about, you don't know where to begin, it's just this easy. Pick a goal. Because this is what the story is about, the goal. Any goal will do. Defeat the Galactic Empire, get a bag of Skittles at the gas station. Anything can be a goal if you can make it important to the character. So pick your goal, assign your character to that goal, and then throw a whole bunch of problems into your story, and you've got something good. Piece of cake, right? You guys ready for your homework? Right.
It will be ready by next Christmas party.
Oh, perfect. I can't wait. I can't wait. 10,000 words. Any other questions? I don't want to keep anybody longer than they want to stay, but I'm happy to talk as long as you'd like. Anything else I can tell you? No? Good. Otherwise, I'm going to be hanging out over here at this table if anybody wants to take a look at the books I brought, or I'm happy to sell them or sign some autographs or whatever you'd like. I'm staying here until you guys leave, so. Oh, also, refreshments, right?
Yes.
Yeah, there's cider, water, cookies, something in a bowl. Help yourselves. Let's mingle. And thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate that you guys all came out here to see this.
A big thank you to you, Ryan.
Yes.
It's my pleasure.